My name is Nancy Kilbride, and I'm the team leader for a program called SNAP, which stands for Supports and Networking for Adoption and Permanency Planning. And I'm here with a couple today who are going to share some different pieces around their adoption journey. So could you introduce yourselves?
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for having us. My name is Duncan McIndoe.
And I'm Adina McIndoe, and we have two children, Nelson and Zoe. Nelson is 8 years old, and Zoe is 2.
When did your children come to you?
So our children came to us at each of them at 2 different ages. Our son, Nelson, his adoption was proposed to us when he was 10 months old. And we went to be with him when he was 11 months. He came home when he was 1 with us. And then our daughter, Zoe, who we adopted just in the past year, was just about 2 when we went to South Africa to meet her. So she came home at age 2, or just under age 2.
All right. And both of your children are from South Africa?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. So we are going to talk about attachment. What was it like meeting your children for the first time?
Well, as you can imagine, with both of our children being different ages when we adopted them, when they joined our families, it was a very different experience with each of them. I can remember when we adopted our son in 2014, and he was this little baby who wasn't speaking yet and was just learning to walk, that it was just a very overwhelming emotional process to see him for the first time, as it was with our daughter as well. But she was older and she was walking around and much more independent, and leading us around to play with other kids. And so just two very different experiences, very different ages.
Yeah, with Nelson, we were actually sent the wrong picture. And so, we had his picture along with another boy's picture. So walking into the baby home for the first time, I could see both of them. And you kind of wondered, well, which one's ours, except the lady who brought our son to us. So that was a little bit different, because sometimes you the picture's important. The picture's important. It's what you end up showing people in the end. So and with Zoe, Zoe was different. I mean, Zoe has a very strong personality too, and just she was twice the age that Nelson was. So Nelson was 11 months and Zoe was 22 months. And she could already string a question together. She could string sentences together, like, no, I don't like that. So it was quite different, I found.
It really was. And going to South Africa to meet Zoe at almost age 2, as you can imagine, she had really formed some strong attachment and bonds to her caregivers, to one caregiver in particular, which we realize and fully appreciate that that's a very positive thing for her, and developmentally it's very important. But it was very difficult as her new parents to step in and essentially break that bond and take her away from that relationship. So very emotionally challenging for us and for her, but we do realize in the long run that having that early attachment and bonding building in the home where she was living is very important and will help her in the longer term.
But for our second, again, for Zoe, we also traveled during a pandemic, which led to riots in South Africa. And so being there during a dangerous time with food shortages and having to line up for food rations, essentially, there were other stresses that weren't there the first time around. So it was good to come home so that we could relax and bond properly.
So tell me a little bit about your very early attachment in South Africa, because you had to spend a period of time there to complete your adoption in South Africa. So what was that like, spending time with your children there and working on those very early days of attachment?
Yeah, as Adina mentioned, when we went to adopt our daughter just this past year, it was during COVID and there were riots, and so the circumstances were very difficult. We were there for 8 weeks, and we knew from having gone previously when we adopted our son that it was, 6 to 8 week period of very intense bonding and time together in a foreign country where you don't really know anyone, and you have this dedicated time where you're just focusing on each other. And so that was very important for us, for our family. It was probably minimized a little bit the second time around with our daughter, just by the circumstances we were in and beyond everyone's control. When we were there in 2014 adopting our son, it was just a very precious time. It was, we didn't have a lot on our schedule. It was just all about him, all about playing, about going out for walks, about bonding, about his nap time, about feeding. We really didn't have much else to focus on. Work was off the table. We didn't have social distractions. We hardly knew anyone. And that's sort of what we were expecting going back to adopt our daughter. And we really were anticipating that and valuing that time that was coming up. But again, it was a little bit disrupted, I would say, by the circumstances. So we were really pleased to come home and to get back into our space and our routine and continue that bonding and attachment with her.
What we did appreciate was being and took advantage of was being in our children's country of birth, and taking pictures, trying to form relationships. We ended up creating a couple of books for both of our kids, just learning a bit about the language, culture, and making plans to go back maybe during a calmer time in a couple of years. But we were also aware that this was an opportunity to get to know our kids in a way that you don't get to know them here in Canada, right? You're in their place of birth. And for our son being 8 years old and going back, it was, I don't even think he noticed any of the uproars that were going on. He was, I think he was just looking. He was looking at everybody, and it was so neat because I think it took some of the mysticism out of his process, walking through his sister's process, and also just seeing South Africa as not something from Madagascar movies that kids and other adults here in Canada kind of allude to with him. So it was, he basically came back a much more confident person, and his identity was strengthened.
Yeah,
So.
and I'll just expand on that. We did receive a lot of questions before we went to South Africa this past year to adopt our daughter. Oh, is Nelson, is your son going to go with you? And some people were concerned, oh, you're going to travel all that way with your son. And we said, no, he's absolutely coming with us. It's really important to him. As much as we're traveling to South Africa to adopt our second child, we're also traveling there to bring along our first and have him experience his country again, to have him experience having his sister join our family.
Okay. And so with any attachment challenges that your children might have had, how have you been intentional in meeting your children's attachment needs? And then where's their attachment now?
It's something that I think we have been aware of from day one with both our son and our daughter. And I'm not saying in any way that we're experts in the area of attachment. We have learned so much. Continue to learn so much, but we were just very cognizant of ways in which we could connect with our son as a baby and with our daughter as a toddler, right from day one. With our son, when he came home, we continued to feed him out of a bottle for as long as we possibly could, and probably beyond the age that a lot of people would feed their child from a bottle. And
Spoon feed him his food.
Spoon feeding him his food. We still do sometimes, and he's 8. And it's just a special time where you're connecting on that very primal level. You're giving food to your child, when they're taking their bottle from you and they're looking in your eyes. It's just a time of connection. So we found opportunities like that to just be very purposeful in how we could connect physically with our children.
Yeah, and reading is pretty huge in our house. With Nelson, when he was younger, we would sit down with sometimes 13, 14 books, and he was a year and a half, and he had the attention span built up to read all of those books and go to the library and return them and get new ones, especially ones with characters that look like him. Mm-hmm. That's really important. And to this day, we still spend every evening cuddling up in bed or on the couch. And now I read to him, and he reads to me too now, which is neat. And with Zoe, she wasn't so interested at first, but then again, neither was Nelson at first. But I think just watching her brother have this special time, she wanted some of that. And so just today, she walked up with about 6 books and sat on my lap and read all 6 of them with me. So reading has been a way that we bond as a family. Mm-hmm. But also, as Duncan said, the food's important, and taking the time to spoon feed, to bottle feed. Routine is really key. Routine, so that both of them know exactly what's happening next. With sleeping, for instance, we're pretty strict on our sleep schedule. A well-rested, well-fed child is a happy child. It's a secure child. So
I think that all of those things speak to structure. Structure around eating, structure around reading time. Our children, not always, but as much as possible, know what to expect. And I think that really helps with the bonding process as they get older.
Well, we also have travel in there.
That's right. So we traveled a lot with our son when he was little. Just the act of coming home as a baby from South Africa, it's a long trip, and we really connected around that time, as we did with our daughter. And both of our children love to travel. They love to get on a plane and go somewhere new. And it's also a time where we step out of our home, we step out of our routines, but we're still very close together as a family, and we connect during those times as well.
Well, we all stay in one room, and I think the kids love that part. So
yeah, all close together.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Another bonding thing, I just thought of this, but Duncan's grandmother back in the day, she used to do this squeeze thing with her hand. So it was a nonverbal, like I love you was 3, or just love you is 2, or just love is 1. And so sometimes Nelson will just walk up to my hand and he'll give me a 1, 2, or 3 squeezes. And it's just a nonverbal something between us. Yeah. And we've started doing it with Zoe. She's starting to understand it. I think at first she's like, why are you squeezing my hand? But I know she'll catch on.
Well, that's really neat. I love that special connection, that signal. It's literally a hand signal.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. And so I know that you've told me before that Nelson encountered some bumps in school, and you did some things that probably really built some strong attachment in at another level to meet his needs. So could you describe what you did around that?
Yeah, I think that and this is something that we've heard in so many different ways from so many different people, that often as children start school in kindergarten or grade 1, they're faced with a lot of additional challenges, and it can be a very challenging time, especially for a child who was adopted. And we did find that as Nelson began school in kindergarten, that it was a very challenging time for him. So at that point in time, we really reached out to our medical community, our family doctor, his pediatrician, and a variety of other healthcare professionals to really support him as he grew and developed and became a part of the school community. I think moving from just being in our family to expanding his community to include the school, and a school in a place where a lot of people look very different from him, was a challenge. It presented a big challenge for him. And so we're very cognizant of that as our daughter gets older and one day goes to school as well. So we just want to be really prepared to support her in that big transition time.
Well, and also taking into consideration that Nelson's only in grade 3. He's only 8 years old, and there may be more to come. I'm sure there will be more struggles to come. So talking to another family like ours, except she has 5 children and who are much older, she says, ride the wave when you have it. You know, when you're on a high, take it, celebrate it, be there. It's a break for you. It's a break for your kid.
And these waves, I love how you talk about the riding the wave and how that parent advised you of that, because both of those kinds of waves can build the attachment and build our kids' confidence, and seeing them through the hard times, being the ones to put those supports in place, and being parenting them, in season and out, even when the season seems very out. That is a part of growing that attachment. And then when you're in these amazing, lovely places, again, that's another type of building that can happen. So I love the way you guys championed your kid in that, and that you're prepared to continue doing that for both your kids. Could you tell me a little bit about specific supports that Zoe has needed?
Yeah, so as we came back from South Africa, and Zoe being a little bit older than her brother was, we've really, well, first of all, we're just very cognizant of how many people are around as we build and develop bonds and attachment with Zoe. And when others come around, sometimes being very overt and teaching her as to what's appropriate when she's looking for help or support, or maybe if she hurts herself, and who to go to and who she shouldn't go to. And we're able to do that with her because she's 2. And I know that Adina can speak to some examples of that.
Yeah, so Zoe's very used to kind of grandmother figures in her life. And so she has a tendency to go to grandmother figures, or basically anybody who is just very nurturing and kind of cuddly and sweet. And she likes to go for comfort. And so I saw my neighbor coming out, and I thought, oh boy, my neighbor is very sweet, very cuddly, and very nurturing. And I thought, she's going to go straight to her again. And the last time my neighbor had picked her up and had coddled her for so long, it must have been 10-15 minutes. And I was thinking, how do I tell you that this isn't right to do? So this time I brought Zoe over, and we had a little talk, and I said, Zoe, if you hurt yourself, or if you need something, or if you want to tell somebody something, I want you to come to me and not to our neighbor. And she looked at me, and she understood what I was saying, and she cried because she was upset. And then she stopped crying, and then we played out there with our neighbor and our neighbor's kids for at least an hour. And Zoe came to me and didn't go to her. So she needed explicit teaching, explicit instruction in how to do this. So I think we did see it with Nelson too. We had a big family reunion as soon as he got home, and Nelson was being passed around to aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. And at first we thought, oh, look, it's so nice. He's going to everybody so easily. And then we thought, well, that's because he's not attached to us. And so we learned that we had to, sometimes it was slightly offensive, but we had to say, no, I need my child back. He needs to come with me. No, I need to comfort my child. No, he fell down. I need you to step away. I need to be the one to comfort him. Oh, he needs help doing this. I need to be the one to meet that need for him. So
and in those early days when you first come home, it seems maybe a little bit offensive to family and friends, but just closing the door, closing the blinds, and saying, you know what, we need this time. When we're ready, we'll invite you in and you can come and meet our new son or daughter. You can come and be close to our family. But right now, in the beginning, we just need this time together, and just sort of closing off a little bit to the outside world.
Yeah, so wise, so wise. Your kids really needed that from you. So wise. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We're going to talk a little bit about openness. So Duncan and Adina, I'm wondering if you could share some key thoughts about your journey with openness so far. What does openness look like for each of your children? And has openness shifted or changed over the time that you've had them? And how are you supporting your children with openness?
Yeah, I think I would answer that question by just saying to start that in context of international adoption, sometimes openness, well, it can look like any number of things. And I think that there are so many factors to consider. One of the aspects of openness is when you have small, very young children, is details around their birth story and how where they were and how they grew and developed when they were in their country of birth, and sharing that with your children, sharing it at age appropriate times and in age appropriate ways that they can understand. We really value that, and we think that that's very important. We once read a study that said by the age of about 10 or 11, your child should know and understand everything about their birth story, the difficult aspects of it, and as well as the positive. And that's something that we are working towards with both of our children. And with our daughter being just 2 and our son being 8, they clearly have different levels of understanding about their beginnings and their birth story that are appropriate for the age and developmental levels that they're at currently.
Yeah, so openness is a funny one because it's very personal and it's very private. And what we learned with our first child is that with openness and with the adoption story, that it's quite private, and that it's his story to tell, and it's our story to protect for him until he's of that age. It's a question that you're asked a lot, both by kids and adults alike, where they'll say, well, where's his real parents? You get that one a lot. Or is that your real sister? And even in answering those questions, it gives part of their story away. And often their story is the only thing they come with, especially, with some kids, their birth parents are known, and for some kids their birth parents are not known. And just by asking and answering that question, it gives away their personal property, really.
Yeah, we really feel like we have been entrusted as Zoe and Nelson's parents with their stories and their beginnings, and we feel as guardians of their stories that we need to be able to say to them, when they're adults with confidence that this is your story for you to be proud of, for you to understand, and for you to do with as you see fit now that you're an adult. No, we have not broadcast your story to the whole world because we didn't know if that's what you would have wanted. So we can honestly say that to them as they grow older, and no shame attached to it whatsoever, but just that this is yours to do with as you want.
Well, I had Nelson ask me one day, well, Zoe, my real sister, clearly he'd been asked that at school. And I said, well, she's as much your real sister as I am your real mom. So yes, she's your real sister. But if you're asking me if you had the same birth mother, so telling him there's a difference between those questions. No, you don't have the same birth mother. And then he proceeded to ask, well, what is Zoe's story? And I said, well, one day when Zoe's old enough to hear her full story, we will tell her story. And if she wants to share that with you, then she can. And he says, well, are you going to tell her my story? I said, well, no, because that will be yours to share with her if you choose. And so it's a little bit, it's another, I guess, difference in a family that's made through adoption, is that there are things that are private, and even from siblings, even within family. So, but as far as openness for our kids and what we do is, when we went back to South Africa, we brought Nelson to the baby home he was in, and so we've been able to keep in touch a little bit that way. And then with Zoe, we've kept in touch with her primary caregiver as well. The person who was her primary caregiver. But we did learn that those Zoom calls and WhatsApp calls were actually not very beneficial for her, in that it would just trigger her. So she knows that her first person is alive and well and loves her, but we've had to put a hold on those calls for now, because it causes her a lot of grief every time it's time to say goodbye, and when she can't touch her, be held by her. So
and I think that as Zoe gets older and more mature and builds an understanding of even just the geographical separation between living in Canada and where South Africa is, that it will be easier for her to have that connection with the place where she lived and some of the people who cared for her. And that's something that we're very open to maintaining. We just realized that right now we need to, I guess, put a little bit more distance between us and her caregivers from South Africa, just as she goes through this developmental time and as she gets older.
And you're still in your first year of that hard work of attachment as well. So yeah, I understand that you are planning a trip back to South Africa in 2 or 3 years. And so could you comment on what it might look like in terms of contacts when you plan to go back?
Absolutely. And I think, in our family, we see maintaining a connection with South Africa for both our son and daughter as an important part of openness. And it's important to us to not to go every year or something to that extent, but to maintain a connection, and every perhaps 2 to 4 or 5 years to have opportunities and to seek opportunities to go back, for our children to see where they lived, to meet people that they were connected to when they were very small.
Where their ancestors
were from, to help them understand with their feet on the ground in South Africa what their culture of origin looks like. And again, we're just very cognizant of their age and their developmental stages, and when would be the best time for them to go back and experience that. As we think ahead to our daughter Zoe and preparing to go to school, we really feel that maybe a trip to South Africa would be in order kind of just around the time or just before she prepares to go to kindergarten to really ground her and help her better understand where she comes from.
So we're going to talk about cultural considerations for Duncan and Adina's children. What are your children's cultural and racial backgrounds?
Both of our children are Zulu, so they are Black, they are Zulu. From the Durban area of South Africa, so it's actually Zulu land. Most Black people there are Zulu.
That's right. And living in Canada, in Western Canada, we're of course very far removed from Zulu culture. So it's really important to us to have our children feel connected nonetheless, even though we're all the way in Western Canada. And we like to celebrate Zulu culture, any opportunity that we get to talk about, read about, learn about things related to Zulu culture, we jump on that in our family. We're very proud of the Zulu heritage and the Zulu culture, and it's something that we want our children to be very familiar with.
But we've had to also learn to become a little bit more flexible in that Zulu is very specific to South Africa, and over here, you know, I mean, there's, what is that? It's less than 3% in Canada, or 3.2% people in Canada are Black. And then of course you come over here to BC and that's less than 1%, you know. Yeah. And then you come to the island, it's even less. So, you know, we met a man the other day from Zimbabwe and introduced ourselves and had our kids play together. And so we also just jump on any opportunity to join something with other racial mirrors.
That's right.
Some groups Nelson is a part of over Zoom, and it's American, right? Because the States, it has a lot more to offer that way.
We've found that there's quite a big Ethiopian community actually in the area where we live, and our children don't share any cultural heritage with Ethiopia yet. We do still see people in the Ethiopian community as being racial mirrors to our children. So to us, that's an important opportunity. And Ethiopia is just one of a number of different countries that we have seen some representation from in our area. So we really also value those connections and opportunities to maintain that connection for our children.
But books are huge. We try to have books with kids that, you know, have darker skin, and the other day we were singing Skinema Rinky Dink with Zoe, and she saw two children in there who were Black, and she said, oh, Nelson, Zoe, that's Nelson, Zoe, and she was so excited. And so, you know, I was once told that, oh, kids don't see color, and that's not been true with either of our kids. When Nelson was, before he could say his name, he used to call himself Nene, when he was only 14 months old. And I had this book, and it had several Black children on it, and he kept pointing to those children saying, Nene, Nene, that's Nene. And so even basically almost pre-verbal, he's able to recognize
that's right.
that he's Black, and Zoe can as well.
And so what have you found in your local community that you can connect with? I know you mentioned the Zoom and Ethiopian community. Is there anything else available in your local community? Where have you had to go to find places and means to connect?
Well, we live in a sort of rural suburban community outside of Victoria, and so we do find that we're often going to Victoria, even, you know, we work there, but we often go back on the weekend to connect with people because there aren't necessarily a lot of people in our immediate area that have African heritage. So we do find that we're moving about the region to connect with people. We love where we live, but we're not necessarily closed to moving to a different community at some point down the road
because of this.
for this
Yeah.
reason, if we should feel like, you know what, we need to live somewhere that has a greater amount of diversity, and that's something that we would consider as well for our children's, for the sake of our children.
Yeah, so we, for instance, last weekend went in to see another family like ours. We know 3 families like ours, and you need to carve out that time to go in, and it's also just refreshing because your kids aren't asked silly questions all the time, just to, people are so curious. People are always so curious, either like touching and or asking about birth stories. And when you go see another family like yours, nobody asks, and it's a relief to us. It's more importantly really good for our kids. But at the same time, I recognize that it's important to see other Black families that aren't built through adoption, so that they can recognize that that is normal as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what have been some of the challenges in connecting, if there have been, in connecting into the Black community?
I think that on occasion, when we've been in areas where, in the States, or we've traveled, or even in Victoria, and we've been around other Black families, that sometimes we do feel a little bit disconnected from them, because
Not accepted.
or not accepted would be a better way of expressing it, because Adina and I are white and our children are Black, and
it's kind of frowned upon, I've found, both on the continent. So in South Africa, we found that adoption, particularly with white parents to Black children, it's not always favored. And here we actually found the same. We were in Montreal. I saw a bunch of children who were Black at a playground, and so I thought, oh, I need to jump on this. And so we brought Nelson over. This was prior to Zoe. And I noticed that a lot of the parents gathered up their kids and off they went. And I thought, oh, that's too bad. So I would hate for our kids to not feel accepted by their own racial community, as well as being different, of course, in the community we live in, which is primarily white. And so it's such a relief to sometimes just go hang out with other families like ours, so that there's that full acceptance. But we do recognize that it is it's going to be part of a struggle for them, I'm sure, for much of their lives. Yeah.
What is most important to you that your children know about their culture? What important messages do you try to convey to them?
I think that a big one for us is that we want our children to realize that their culture is important, that it's a very significant culture. It's not something that's other or unique or foreign, but that it's a vibrant culture. There are people living in South Africa, millions of people who are Zulu. It's a modern culture. It's a living culture. I don't want them to, I guess, develop a North American attitude that it's different from everyone else, and it's not real. It's from a distant place, but it really is a real culture, and we want them to feel connected to it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for all that you've shared. Really appreciate your insights, and I know lots of adoptive families will as well.
It's our pleasure.